Hi, everybody. I'm Sunny, and this is We Gotta Talk, a live weekly digital talk show and podcast where we like to dig deep. Real talk, big topics. Now, let's dig in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of We Gotta Talk. There's going to be background noise. Just a little heads up before we get into today's live interview. I have an army of people here helping with a very long overdue organization project. So excuse the background noise, but today's guest is so exciting, and I'm really glad you're here. Today, we have Kim Rittberg, who's the founder of Henry Street Media, which does content strategy, media training. But Kim also has a background in marketing journalism. She is the host of the upcoming limited series podcast, Mom's Exit Interview. So today we're going to touch on specifically the topic of women in the workforce and how it looks so different for all of us to be involved in a profession, and the things that keep us at work and the things that kind of scare us away from working under that structure. Let's bring in Kim. And Kim, thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you for having me, Sunny. It's so fun. Don't worry. You don't have to apologize for noise. I live in a high rise in Brooklyn, and even with the windows closed, there's always noise. So don't worry.
You sound great. I'm literally eating my microphone because I'm like, oh God. Yeah, it's a mess over here. You know how you plan things for days? I'm sure you do. And you're like, this is going to be great. It's the perfect time of day where my house is quiet. And then 15 things happen the night before. And you're like, okay, we're going to
the more you prep, the higher likelihood that something will go wrong. It's like exponentially more.
Exactly. Well, you have a background in TV news too. We lean in hard to the no plan strategy. Give me an open rundown and a breaking news situation any day. I do life like that. I'm very unstructured, and usually it works out well. This is my punishment for actually trying to plan a day. So
absolutely.
Anyway. Kim, tell us about your background. We told everybody that currently you do media strategy, branding. You help people essentially get their brand identities and their businesses off the ground. But you have a long professional history that ties you into some pretty major companies as well. I'm going to just read a couple. Netflix, Target, Us Weekly, Nordstrom. Tell us about your professional background.
So yes, I started for the first 10 years in TV news, which Sunny and I, of course, have in common. So, the news junkie in me, whenever there's a big story, comes alive. But I shifted. So I was a producer and writer in TV news for about 10 years. And then I wrote several shows for TV long form shows, like The Fabulous Life of Justin Bieber and several.
Stop. I just saw him in concert.
I know you saw. I saw on your Instagram. I have such Bieber fever, honestly, always.
Did you get to meet him? I'm going to just fangirl for a second. And what was that like?
I didn't get to meet him. I got to write. Cool. I did get to write and produce an hour-long show about him. And I got to meet the people who bedazzle his sneakers for $5,000, his assistant, his stylist. I mean, he's an amazing team, and it was such a cool project. But that's one of the things I worked on. And then I wrote and produced several true crime shows. And then I really wanted to get into digital. This was 2015, and I absolutely knew that it was something exciting. I could sort of feel the energy. And so I went to Us Weekly and I launched their video unit. And so we scaled from about 3 people to 18 people. And this was as I was having my first child. So I like to say, when Kim's blinds are down, don't come around. I was pumping in there twice a day. I was pumping twice a day, and everyone would know, oh, blinds are down. Let's text her. Let's message her. And I was running an 18-person team and creating all the videos for Us Weekly, all the different types of videos, celebrity, lifestyle, news. And it was so fun and amazing doing both editorial content, so just the regular content, and then also branded content. Right. So working with Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom and tons of amazing brands. And then from there, I worked in Netflix marketing and briefly at Pop Sugar. And so I just feel very lucky to have worked at some of these amazing brands and understand how to market a brand and figuring out that beautiful middle between what does the brand want and what do people want. Mm-hmm. And in between is where amazing content lives.
You know, this whole digital media world has opened up job descriptions and possibilities that we never thought of before. And I'm sure you shared the same thought getting out of TV journalism. You think, God, who could ever need my skill set? All I do is talk for a living. I have a BA and BS, as I used to say. But it's shocking and pleasantly surprising how many companies need people like you to help tell that brand story, and honestly, how impactful that is on the bottom line. So entrepreneurs or anyone else who's listening who might be sort of wary about that process of branding or putting out into the world who they are, tell us how important that really is and how someone like you steps in to help.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say that everybody has the same insecurities as everyone else. So, I might have a list of impressive media places you've heard of, but when I went to work for myself, I also thought, who's going to hire me? What am I going to do? Mm-hmm. A more experienced entrepreneur might think, well, here's a list of 20 things that you can do. But when you're starting out, you feel a little bit overwhelmed and maybe it's a little bit of imposter syndrome and maybe confidence. But once you really figure out what your offering is and how you're helping other people, you get your message down. So whether you're offering a product or a service, if you are so clear on who you are and what you're offering people, that unlocks everything. And so from there, what I do is when I work with clients, I sit down and I really narrow it down to what do you do? And then why are you the best at it? Why are you the person? Why are you the person someone should hire or your product someone should buy? And then from there, then we think about all the fun, creative content. But at the very core of it, you have to be super, super clear about what you do and what you offer. Otherwise, it's a crowded world out there, and it's people can be nuanced, but your message can't be.
Oh my God, I'm working with you after this.
It's also easier for me to advise other people than it is for yourself. It's always easier to bring in an expert. And that is one thing I do advise is you have to invest in yourself. And I'm the same. I just this year hired a photographer, redid my website, hiring a social media manager. You have to invest in yourself to get to that next level. So, when people start out, it's a little overwhelming. There feels like a lot. Find those people who can help you.
Right.
A coach, a social strategist, a content strategist, a media trainer, whatever you need, that's the answer on how to level up.
So you have made several career transitions, and I really want to dig into your personal experience going from working as a mother under the corporate umbrella or under a bigger company to working for yourself and carving that out. I always like to preface discussions that we have about this, Kim, with the acknowledgement that it's easier to do this in some instances and for some people than it is for others. And having a partner who had, in my case, a job that I could rely on because I needed to quit my job was incredibly helpful. So we acknowledge the privilege of it when we discuss things like this. You don't ever want to come across as insensitive, because sometimes, Kim, I'm sure you share this sentiment. It feels like, we talk about these experiences. We say, just quit your day, just quit and be an entrepreneur. And we know it's not always that simple, but these days it's becoming easier with digital platforms for people to sort of build their empire, so to speak, before they step out. So tell us a little bit about your emotions and what it was like transitioning from a structured workplace where you had your healthcare and your retirement and all of that to the entrepreneurial space where you presumably had to leave that behind before moving on.
So I mentioned before that I launched the video unit for Us Weekly. And for me, both professionally and personally, I really felt like I made it. This is it. I had a great boss and he was very supportive. He sort of let me do my own thing, but would also give advice when I needed it. And I had a great team that I got to hire, really good peers in the other units that I was collaborating with. It was really honestly a dream job. And I had my first baby there. I say I had two babies. I had Lily and I had the Us Weekly video unit, and they were growing at the exact same time because when I started there, I was pregnant. So as I was there over maybe a year or two, I became pregnant with my second, and the company was acquired. And acquisitions are messy, and this was like a tornado, and a lot of executives were fired. And my team and none of us were fired, but people started quitting when they knew we were being acquired because it's scary and you don't really know if you're going to have a job. And in that uncertainty, I realized, I had thought I made it. I had thought this is the golden ticket to, I'm not sure where, but I really thought this was the golden ticket. And then my team is quitting. All of my peers are fired. I'm not kidding. I'm 9 months pregnant. And I realized I've been working so hard for 14 years and doing this awesome job. And they're saying it's awesome, not just me saying. The people who bought the company said, you did such a great job with this unit. It's a big part of why we're buying Us Weekly. So I felt amazing. But the truth is, I was totally out of control. I had no control over my career. I had to rebuild my whole unit. I was in the hospital bed on my iPhone, scrolling, looking at resumes, emailing my colleagues. Okay, interview this person. If they say yes, hire them. If they say no, hire this person. I think this person has the right skill set. it was really hard. It felt really bad. It just felt really like garbage to have that be sort of the epilogue to my story. And that was for sure my epiphany. I was like, wow, if this is how my dream job is sort of wrapping up, I think I'm done with corporate. But I like to say messages, the story is like, that was my epiphany. And then I started my company. But the true story is I still took 2 other jobs because it's scary to go out on your own. And, it requires a lot of confidence, networking, and again, financial stability, figuring out how much money do you need to bring in. Just all of these questions came up. So I was grappling with these philosophical questions. Without my fancy business card, who am I? Who's my colleague? Who brings in grapes and shares them with me? And then the real questions of how do I find clients? How do I level up my business? How do I, really grow my brand? And so it was really exciting. It was 100% the right decision, but it wasn't always super easy. And so that was my impetus to start the podcast, Mom's Exit Interview, is as I went out on my own, as I started asking these questions, both the inner questions and then the tactical questions, I realized there are a lot of women doing these amazing things. There are entrepreneurs, there are consultants, there are part-time workers. There's everything between stay-at-home moms and climbing the corporate ladder. And there's a huge space in that. And people should be inspired and realize there are a lot of options out there. And so I started this podcast as the idea, I want this to be a resource to women. I want to tell stories of moms who leaned out of the 9-to-5 and leaned into a fulfilling professional and personal life. And then also bring on experts with really tactical tips on how you can do it. Financial experts, business growth experts, branding experts, psychology, the therapy, what's going on in your house, how to handle the changes with your kids. So, it's been an amazing, amazing 2.5 years, and I'm so content and satisfied. But it really put me in an uncomfortable position of really asking all these questions you don't ask when you're going from A to B in a corporate world.
What do you think? I've thought about this a lot because I do think there are some systemic issues that make it difficult. You brought up pumping, and the idea of like, when the blinds are down, or in my case, I would go pump in behind the control room in TV news, and the director walked in on me, and there's my nipples 3 inches out in the pump, and I'm like, what's up?
Isn't it always there's my nipples?
There was this nursing mom the other day. I can't remember where we were, somewhere with the kids. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I was like, all of Orlando has seen my areola. We're good. I'm okay with you nursing. I've seen, and I have showed my own boobs so much. Anyhow, what do companies get wrong when it comes to working mothers? And if you were advising even a client of yours who happened to be a bigger company on how better to retain some of that intellectual capital they have, what would you suggest?
That's a great question. And so my podcast focuses on moms leaving the 9-to-5, but I feel very strongly that it is not for everyone to leave the 9-to-5.
Right.
If you are working for a good company that treats you well and gives you flexibility, you should stay there. So I think that I'm very much like, it's not a one size fits all. I think some of the things that companies should be leaning into that I think would really change the game, paid leave is one of the absolute biggest things. Both paid leave for both genders. So one of the biggest things is longer paid leave. I personally had I got only the New York State paid leave because I was only at my company for 5 months. So I actually didn't get any company payment, even though I had been there about 5 months and then I'd been working for about 14 years. When I stayed through with my second, I'd been there 2 years, my mat leave got cut from what would have been 6 or 8 weeks to 3 weeks. So I would have gotten 3 weeks of corporate paid leave. I mean, that's totally unacceptable.
Whoever are literally still like not back in place.
You are still in those purple bandage underwear and bleeding out like a wound victim. Yeah. So truly 3 weeks is appalling. And that's honestly, a lot of companies have that. And especially, workers who are in person, I've heard horror stories. So I think paid leave is one of them, and also encouraging both genders to take that leave, because there ends up being this sort of like 2-level thing where moms are taking it and dads aren't, then it becomes stigmatized. And part of what made me just say, I want to work for myself, I'm like, I don't care about the stigma. I actually don't care what anyone thinks anymore. So I don't care that I had this big, amazing, fancy title and now I work for myself and you don't really understand my job. That's okay. Maybe you're not my target audience. But I think that it's, it does become challenging when only one gender is taking that leave. So I think that the push for both genders, all genders really, taking that leave is super important. Another thing is holistic benefits. Some of the things that I think a lot of the people who are pushing for change, like there are a lot of amazing people pushing for change. And on the show, I talked to Catherine Goldstein, host of The Double Shift, Christine Michelle Carter, who's an expert on working moms. A lot of people have really smart and interesting ideas. Christine's some of hers were moms don't want ping pong. Like, I don't want a filet mignon dinner at my desk. I want to be home eating mac and cheese with my kids. So don't give me that free dinner. Give me that seamless card and send it home to me. So really rethinking the benefits. A lot of companies do have really great benefits, but they're not necessarily putting that thought into what will benefit a working parent. Think about that. So some of those benefits, some of those even start with fertility. Some companies are offering egg freezing or fertility benefits. Those are some of them. Benefits that really appeal to parents, childcare benefits, stipends for childcare, because you think about that's a huge cost. And that is also a huge calculation for people. It depends on what you're being paid. In some places, childcare or a nanny is almost the same as your post-tax salary. So that's a calculation. So I think there's really a lot of things. I mean, I also think some of it is leaders speaking the right language to parents and to understanding the way that parents use their time, the way we balance our time, and that we're a little stretched. So I think some tangible that aren't necessarily like countrywide, some of the other things have the company should push for or government should push for, but some of them on a one-on-one basis is really understanding that almost every parent wants to be home between the hours of like 5-ish and 7-ish to be with their kids, to be eating with them, and to be putting them down. And so I think some of that even starts with basic communication. So either not sending emails during that time or sending that email with I don't expect a response till the morning, things like that say, I understand you. I understand your life. So sometimes it's not necessarily intentional, but it's a clear sign that what is a priority for you is not a priority for us.
What have you been hearing? I know that Mom's Exit interview is launching shortly. Like we said, it's a limited edition series. You're going to be talking to different women on their experiences making that transition. But what have some of the common themes that you've been hearing about resonated most? And what are they saying as to why the risk of entrepreneurship was worth it over the comfort of staying in that designated position?
That's a great question. And as a part of the show, we did a survey of hundreds of moms across the country, and 65% of them said they would shift away from full-time into entrepreneurial or consulting or part-time. And the top reasons were flexibility and control. So when these working parents are leaning out of the 9 to 5, they're looking for that flexibility and control. And then some of the things that they were also struggling with the most is being present at home, balancing the workload or even the mental workload. There's this thing that oftentimes not only do women do maybe the lion's share of actual domestic work, but also the mental load of it. I mean, I'm the calendar keeper, and my husband is an amazing participant in our household as a partner, as a father. I mean, I manage the calendar. And so I think that that's sort of, for a majority of people, that's happening. And so some of the things that people were saying that they were pleased with was even when they were struggling with self-confidence or for financial questions and they just kept driving through it, they really saw clarity in having control over their life and their schedule and not asking for permission to take their kid to swim class, to go to the doctor, to just take a walk for themselves. So I think that it's been a big thing for people. And it's a different story for everybody. Like you said earlier, everyone has different circumstances, both their home circumstances, the financial circumstances. So each episode on the show, I bring in an expert. So I have Rachel Cruz, who's a financial expert, with how much money should you actually save for that? Gretchen Rubin, the happiness expert, with like tips on how you can be a little happier and a little more present today in the now. Things that you can do today that you don't have to like spend 7 hours reading a book on. So I think a lot of these there's those tangible things that you can be doing, and also a reframing of your mind of saying, this is my choice and this is my choice for right now. Like that's one of the biggest things that I've gotten from speaking to a lot of the moms and the experts we've had on. Dr. Lisa, who's a Psychology of Parenting co-host, and Neha Rusha of Mother Untitled, thinking of it as a season, right?
Mhm.
When someone says to me, what do you do? I say, I run my own company. And, what are you going to do in 3 years or 5 years? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I will still be helping people and
Right.
teaching people and guiding them in some way. But the idea that it's, especially when you're a parent, just like your kid's life is in chapters, your
Mhm.
career can be in chapters or seasons. And you should feel ownership over saying, this feels right to me right now. It's not to say like there aren't challenges. Like, of course there are challenges. If somebody leans out and maybe they're getting back into on-ramp, there could be challenges there. There are. But if you have clarity around what it is that you want now, treating it as a chapter of life and also tuning out the noise. Like
Mhm.
if you feel like there's stigma around your choice, whether to be part-time or consulting or entrepreneur and not climb that ladder, to just tune out that noise. Like if it's working for you, not having that comparison culture, which is very harmful for everyone.
Yeah, that's hard. And I find myself unable to answer that question sometimes when people ask me what I do now. I'm like, I feel weird. I do a little bit of this, I do a little bit of that. I host, I have a podcast. But how do you pay the bills? Well, it comes from here. And, it's such a complicated answer. But I have had shame around that coming from a position where I was able to say very decisively, I do this. I'm the main anchor here. And boom. And it was like, oh, cool job. And now I feel like a circus act sometimes. And people, I agree with you, is what I'm trying to say. People, I don't think we're expected to have this concise, crisp answer all the time. And if you can get rid of people's expectations of what you should be doing or what's considered an actual job, they don't need to understand it. You need to understand it and make it work. So I love to hear that. I do have this question that rings in my head quite a bit, though, when I think about the amount of women who are leaving the workforce. And we've certainly heard this post pandemic as well. People, men and women, looking for flexibility, control, all the things you mentioned. How many entrepreneurs can the world really have, though? I mean, is it going to balance out one day? It feels like this exodus may tip things in another direction too.
To small, you mean to self-employment and small
To
business owner? Yeah,
self-employment and small businesses, right? Do you think we'll
right.
see it kind of float back? Because right now it seems like there is this push toward people starting their own small businesses or companies or being, like we said, entrepreneurial in some way.
So here's what's very interesting. I think sometimes we as a society think of when we hear entrepreneur, we're like, oh, someone on the cover of Forbes, a unicorn valuation of their company. That's sort of our current moment thought of entrepreneur, but it's really self-employment, right? So it could be your mom and pop shop. It could be a bodega. It could be a gas station. It could be a t-shirt company. It can be a service consultant. So this is one of the things that I have learned from Mom's Exit Interview podcast is that self-employment and entrepreneurship comes in all different faces, cities, suburbs, rural area. It can be a lot of things. So one of the things is don't think you have to scale. So I talked to Carly Roney of the Knot.com. They were valued at $1 billion. They went
Wow.
IPO. She had 2 little toddlers and she's an amazing inspiration. And so she now advises female entrepreneurs. And she said, be careful about scaling. Women ask her for advice. Should I take money? And then she says, make sure your goals are aligned with an investor's goals. Often they're not, because some companies take money and they want to skyrocket you and see growth really, really fast. That's so they can see a great return on their investment. But she's like, that might not be a sustainable business model for you, for your life, and for what you want. So I think when we think of self-employment, it could be a 2-person company. It could be a 10-person company. It could be a 1,000-person company. You could be a consultant. Like there are a lot of people who are consultants and you work on a project basis and maybe you take off the summers, or something like that. So there are a lot of different things. So I think I guess my answer is, I don't think there can be too many entrepreneurs. And I think that self-employment can come in a variety of forms. And so I think it's very inspirational when I hear of all the people starting their businesses. And for some, it's a small business. Maybe it's a side hustle. Maybe it's a part-time entrepreneur, right? Maybe they spend 20 hours of it on it a week instead of 80 or 40. So I think there's just a lot of faces of that.
Yeah. What other things have you learned in the first few episodes of recording Mom's Exit Interview?
Great question. Well, I loved your point earlier about the very first thing is unlocking in your own brain that you and your family are really the most important thing. So as a part of my business, my company, I do media training. And a lot of what I see with my clients is we all have this narrative of what other people are saying about us.
Mhm.
It's a made up narrative. We actually don't know what they're thinking about us. The truth is they're probably thinking about what they're ordering for dinner. Like they're not thinking about you and judging you. And if they are, you should block them on your social media. So I think number one, this idea that we have to have the perfect answer and the perfect soundbite. I mean, I do train people in soundbites. So I think number one,
We need
get
a
your
little
soundbite. Yeah, we need a soundbite. Okay, no, I lied about that. Sorry, that was not true. You do need a soundbite, but your soundbite doesn't have to be the same soundbite it was 8 years ago. So, Sunny, you could say, I do this now. I was an anchor for Fox. That's okay. Now it's a bullet on your resume, and it's not the first thing you say.
Right.
So.
Right.
I think number one, it's owning your narrative and saying whatever it is you're doing, create a soundbite out of it, create a messaging point out of it, say it to yourself in your mirror, in your phone 100 times until you can own it. So that's, I think, like my number one thing is whatever it is you think you want to do, get clarity around that, talk it out with some people, network, get a business coach, whatever it is, find clarity around what is that next step. And then when you have that next step, own it. Own it and don't question it. And when people ask you, what do you do? Say that with confidence. I think that's like the number one thing. Other things that I have learned is that these decisions of moms leading out of the corporate world, again, it's people across the country. It's people in all different financial situations, and it's for all different reasons. But a lot of it is flexibility and control. And there are a lot of ways to make it work. And I think some of the keys to making it work is figuring out answering those really important questions. Financially, what do you need to do for your own household? That is different for every single person. Mentally, how can you feel confident in your decision? So figuring out how you can feel clarity and comfort in your decision. And for each person, that is a different thing. But it is addressing those questions like, who do you think is judging you and do you care? The most important thing is your happiness, your family's happiness. Lastly is getting a coach, like whatever it is, if you're going to be a consultant or an entrepreneur or a part-time or a side hustle on Etsy, find a coach or an advisor who can actually take you through the step-by-step, or friends or find in your network someone doing it who's a few steps ahead of you, because that is how you can see, oh, this person is doing it. Okay, I have those same skills, some of those skills. Can I do that? And so I think those are a couple of the first steps. And then also build a community, in-person community, social media community, like really find support. It can be lonely, but it does not have to be. So I think finding a community of like-minded people who are going to cheer you on, because if you're surrounding yourself with people who don't really understand what you're doing, you're going to feel down about it, and you should not feel down about it. Like, the main thing I learned is this is really exciting. And with the digital world and so many people working remote, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur or consultant or a part-time worker.
Yeah, it's I don't want to say it's easy to get leads, but it's so much easier than ever. And I feel like some of my biggest freelance jobs have come from like a DM on Instagram where someone's like, hey, I can't take this gig because whatever, any interest? Or, I mean, it's really awesome to feel supported. And I think that the myth that I had in my mind was because I was stepping away from a structured workplace, I'd be losing access to those brilliant people that I worked with and what they thought about things. When in reality, I found that there's a whole supportive network of other people doing the same thing. And it's been so, so cool to like lean into that a little bit and say, hey, you and I have the same kind of skill set, or let me help you do this and you help me do this. It's actually, it almost feels bigger in a way than it did before in a quote unquote real job.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we forget is when you're in the corporate world or the 9 to 5, you don't really see, but there are a lot of consultants advising companies. Like my first personally, when I decided I left Netflix and I decided I was definitely going to work for myself 2 years after my epiphany, I finally really did work for myself. And one of my first clients was through a contact. We had lunch. He referred me to someone. That person was looking for a media executive to help out. I was working 3 days a week. I worked with People Magazine as a 3-day-a-week consultant. In video, I ended up executive producing one of their podcasts. It was amazing. Had you told me that opportunity existed 3 years ago, I would never have understood that that's possible. But a lot of companies are looking for some help, and maybe for whatever reason they can't bring on a full-time person, or they don't want to, and mutually, like, I didn't want full-time and whatever. There are a lot of those opportunities out there. Once you really start networking with people, I've had other clients of mine are small businesses looking for a creative consultant. So I came in, I gave them creative ideas. I helped oversee some video. For other clients, I do content strategy. So these are, small or mid-sized businesses that can't necessarily hire a full-time person or a full team, but they hire me as an outside consultant. And it is a little bit hard to see outside your realm when you're in the four walls of an office. But the more you talk to people, you start asking them questions about how they structure their business, what did they struggle with, and how did they grow, you'll start to really unlock a lot of paths that you didn't see before.
I feel like I buried the lead here, but how old are your kids? I should have.
My kids are 6. I'll say it in kid world. My children are 6 3/4 and 4 3/4.
Oh, that's adorable. They hit the quarters in your house. We only do halves here.
We don't do a quarter, 3/4 birthday, but
Right,
the
but
3/4 mark is very important.
Oh my God, that is so funny. So what does your day-to-day look like now? And I feel like that could be sort of inspirational to people to understand, okay, if I do make this leap or make this change, this is what things could look like for me.
Sure. So that's a great question. I try to ask people that on my podcast too. I'm like, what does a week look like? What does a day look like? Because sometimes people think about it broadly, it's a little
Right.
overwhelming. So what I do is I generally have one day that is, I'd like to say, anchored in by a client meeting.
Mhm.
Once I know that I have one day where there's a client meeting, then I try to do other meetings in that day. I
Mhm.
find to do deep work, I really like to get a chunk of hours. So if I see there's one day where it's a little bit empty, then I block it off. And then I say, okay, this is when I am working on X client, or I'm working on scripts for my podcast, or I'm preparing for that other project that's going to start next month. So when I want to do deep work, I try to clear a day. Otherwise, I try to take my son to swim class every Tuesday. I try to be open about that. And I try to, on Fridays, I try to log off a little early. I don't want to say a flaw. It's not a flaw. I have a feature. I have a characteristic about myself. When I'm really into something, I find it a little hard to unplug. So I'm trying to be better about ending Friday a little earlier. So as the weekend starts with my kids, I'm really mentally present with them. My thinking is like, I made this big choice to not work this insane company hour of 60 hours a week or 45, 50 hours, then another 10 on the weekends on my phone, traveling across the country. I'm making this choice to have a more balanced life that's a little more flexible. And if I'm not sticking to that, I'm not being true to what I said my goals were. So my goals are to be more intentional with my decisions and my time. So I try to log off a little early on Friday. Tuesday afternoons, I try to take my son to swim, and then I try to work in blocks. So I have one of those calendars where people can select times, but I also just like to actually give the times that I prefer. I'm like, you know what? That's actually like, I have 2 hours after other calls. I'd rather do those then, instead of like the morning before I'm going to sit down, do a bunch of research, do a bunch of script writing for my podcast. That's deep work time. So that's sort of how was that helpful? Is that sort of how I try to structure my day?
That was so helpful. I love it. Well, and I like too, I mean, the idea that you can pick a couple of things that you want to be present for and work around that. I mean, I think when you come from a super like workhorse mentality or a fast paced work environment, you do tend to like, as soon as you sit down, just like really drill down. But I love having the idea, for example, with your son's swim lessons, to have something on the calendar that you know you need to be free by that point and make that your priority and work around it. Because if you left for that reason, if we switched career tracks for that reason, you want to be there for it, right? You want to be there for what you made that huge change for. So I love that. I think that's a really practical tip for people. It's like, envision, what would my ideal work life look like? And sure, you still like to work, it would include that, but having those moments with your kids, I think that's great.
And sometimes people say, what are your goals? And I think this was the first year where my goals weren't as pie in the sky. They were more concrete. Mm-hmm. In some ways they were more like lofty, but then other ways they're more concrete. So it's like, be present with my kids and like, be intentional. So I've started saying no to projects. I've started saying no to some parent stuff at school that I'm like, you know what? I actually don't have that time right now. Maybe in the fall I will. So saying no to things, being intentional with my time. The other tip I have is in the survey for our podcast, a lot of moms asked how to be more present. And I got this tip from Gretchen Rubin and Dr. Lisa, and I have my own personal tip, how to check in to pull yourself out of work mind mode and be present with your kids. Something physical. So Gretchen, this was actually Happiness Guru Gretchen Rubin. This is her tip. Do something physical with your kids. So if your kid's into Legos, even if you don't like Legos, which I like, sort of like Legos, but not really.
I love Legos.
Oh,
newfound passion. Get me sat down with an instruction manual. I'm like, this makes so much sense.
I'm like, why won't this fit? Why won't this fit? I'm like so frustrated by it. But then I just like, you know what? It's going to look bad. It's not really going to work, but I'm just going to smile. But okay. So for you, it's fun. But the tip is to do something that is physical, because when you're actually using your senses, it's something that your brain is actually truly focusing on the physicality of what you're doing. So if it's Legos or clay or soccer or baseball, that you can't, it's harder to be thinking about your assignment or your client or your social media when you're doing something physical with your children. So I found that when I was in the working world, it took me till Saturday morning to fully unplug from my work. And I felt really cheated. I felt like the corporate world was cheating me of my own time, my own mental space. In the morning on Saturday morning, I took my kids to swim, and it's such an ordeal. Like going to swim class is such an ordeal, especially we live in Brooklyn, and it's like,
even if we have a pool in our backyard, it's still an ordeal. I'm like, the suits, the sunblock, the hair thing, the braid, the make sure, it's a thing.
But at least you can run inside and throw all your stuff in the wash.
That's true.
So in Brooklyn, it's like a super ordeal. You're getting them with their clothing and their towel and their hat cap, and then you're getting on the subway. It's a whole ordeal. The actions, because it's so involved, it really helped me be present and check in. But that was related to needing something and realizing I did need something to make me physically check in with my kids. And I try to hold on to that. I'm very into art. Creativity has been like a big part of my life. I studied art as a kid. So for me, I'll try to do something artistic with my children. That's very therapeutic. I feel very present, drawing, or doing something with clay or weaving. So I know that that's something for me that is a good way to be present, but everyone has their own thing. So I think that's a really good tip for parents.
I want to round things out with a broader, sort of more philosophical question. And I think this is on my mind because we've been watching Severance lately. Have you seen that series?
I've heard great things about it. I haven't seen it though.
It's like all about, you should. And it really is sort of in alignment with what we're talking about today. It's this company that severs people's abilities to remember their work life when they're at home and vice versa. So essentially they're operating as two separate sentient beings that have no cross knowledge of each other. It's it's really crazy and it's really good. Anyhow, but it got me thinking about how much passion should drive our jobs and our life. Like our parents came from generation where you worked to pay the bills. Now these days, people want to work, at least ideally, to fuel a passion and to get paid. I'm not sure that either extreme is the right answer, but how much do you think passion should fuel what you do, and how does it impact how you show up every day? Because I think a lot of these concepts of entrepreneurship sound really great, but there's certainly a segment of people out there who say, well, it would be great to, do what I love all day, which is sit down and play Legos, but I can't because I won't get paid for it. So what do you think should drive people, and what drives you, and what's a good way to find that balance?
That is such a great question. And I really feel like I've been thinking about that for the last few years, of that there is that generation of like our grandparents who were like, yeah, you clock into a factory, you do your job, you come home, you eat dinner with your family. That's it. That's life. Yeah. And our generation has a completely different vision of work, where you should be passionate and it should drive you. And I think that probably it's somewhere in the middle. I think it depends. I think that one of the things I thought was interesting is right now it's the most educated generation of women ever. I think women are outnumbering men in terms of college degrees. So we really have so much education, and then many people are going on to even advanced degrees, that the education level is higher and people are spending so much time at work. So the idea of sort of clocking in and clocking out, it doesn't really jive with our idea that you're studying for so long and you're supposed to find what you're passionate about, and then you're going to work 40, maybe 50, maybe 60 hours a week, but kind of hate your job. So I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. I I do think I had a friend of mine, Caroline, who said this once, and I thought this is really smart. It's a good job if you feel like you're contributing, you feel like you're growing and learning. So that's how I think about it. And if I am there and I feel like I'm participating in something and helping to build something, and then I am also learning, like that to me is the best. And I have found I've always gotten bored if I'm in the same job for too long. But it's a great question. How much do we need to get out of work? Like, what does it need to bring us? Like, of course, they pay you and you show up. That's the basic trade.
That's the transaction. Yeah.
The transaction is money for time or brain power. So that's the basic trade. But there's so many layers on top of that in the 21st century. And so I think really it's about figuring out something you do like. Love would be great, but something you do like and you find passion in. And then within that, figuring out a way to let that be a part of your life, but not overtake your life. And I think that's why we're seeing, though, so many moms making different decisions as a part of their careers, because I think there's too much job creep into our home life. And that's in my opinion, what we're seeing with people exiting is that it's very hard to invest so much time at work and then also feel like you're investing the right amount of time that you want at home. It's really challenging. So I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that if there's a better balance to be had where people can find passion, listen, our generation does want passion. They do want to enjoy what they do. Most people, our generation, and I would say even Gen Z, you're seeing it even more. They really want companies that are doing right by the world, that are living by their values. So I think the idea of passion being wrapped up in work is only going to grow. So I think both companies and the government, I think, need to do better in terms of helping moms in the workplace, making it both a more welcoming place with benefits, with communication, with understanding that parents do need flexibility, but also maybe everyone needs flexibility. Maybe a lot of people, don't want to be working every single night and on the weekends for whatever reason, whether they're taking care of an elderly person in their family or their cat or running a marathon. So I think, what I'm hoping is a little more understanding that there is a life away from work. And then secondarily is also connecting with moms and saying there are other choices should you want them. And don't listen to any stigmas or assumed stigmas about leaning away, leaning out, leaning sideways, doing part-time, staying at home. Do whatever it is that makes you happy and ask those questions to figure it out. So I think that's sort of my view in a nutshell about passion, and it can be a part of your life. But I think if you're letting your passion overtake your entire life, for me, it's not super healthy. I'm a person, I'm like all or nothing. So I try to say when I'm doing all and I'm super involved in a project, I'm really excited, I got to shut it down because I have 2 kids out there who love me and still want me to be around. And I'm doing them a disservice by being so into that project on my computer when these like adorable little children want me to be there for dinner.
Yeah, it's a good checks and balance system for sure. Kim, you are amazing. I'm so grateful you took time to speak from your vast experience to all the people out there who might be questioning what's next for them professionally. Can you tell us a little bit about when we can listen to Mom's Exit interview and where, and other ways to connect with you?
Yes. So thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. I love your show, and I feel like you always ask such smart and insightful questions. So thank you. I feel very honored to be a guest. So for anyone listening, follow me on Instagram at Kim Rittberg, and KimRittberg.com has Mom's Exit Interview podcast. Sign up. We will alert you when it's launching because we are signing with a podcast network, which is very exciting. So we're launching in May, and the exact date. So if you follow me on Instagram or you sign up on the website, I will 100% tell you when it's launching. And we're going to have every episode has a mom with an amazing inspirational story and an expert. So it's like action-packed, full of tips, super useful, news background. People need to find it useful, full of information. So I'm really excited about that. And you can connect with me on Instagram, Kim Rittberg, LinkedIn, Kim Rittberg, and sign up so that I can let you know when Mom's Exit interview is dropping.
I love it. Full of tips and tricks. We love a good graphic with some bullet points, right, Kim?
Nothing better than a bullet.
Yeah,
nothing better than a bullet point.
Just make it simple. That's all we need to do. Okay, Kim, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time. We'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys, if you watch live, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening to the podcast, thank you as well. Please do leave a rating and review. Those actually help a lot to get these episodes out to people who might find them helpful or useful, entertaining, or otherwise good in some way. So go ahead, just scroll down on your podcast app on an Apple phone. This is the one that matters most for some reason. Don't ask me why. Tap the 5 stars, leave your review, and I will send you a virtual hug and kiss through the metaverse. Thank you again for listening and watching. We'll see you next week on We Gotta Talk with more good stuff. Bye.